bird kills me.
I'm glad you like that.
I need
I
something
sound
for my
good, right?
mic now that.
Yeah, you sound great, man.
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay, cool. Cool. All right. Trying to figure out what my range is here. You guys aren't getting my air conditioner sound in there at all?
Nope, nope.
No?
Perfect. All right. That's all I need.
Let's see here. Streams. Hello. See the post. All right.
I know I posted on the Dungeon Studio.
Yeah, I posted it in my channel. Dungeon Studio.
We're bringing all the streams
Everybody's...
together tonight. It's
Yeah, we really are. I mean, this is kind of the plan in the long run, is to bring the community together rather than us having to fight the world of single-mindedness, which I think is the hardest thing when it comes to D&D, which will be an interesting conversation we can have.
Oh, yeah.
There's actually you weren't here earlier, Corey, but I want to bring Josh on, who's the Dungeon Stream founder.
He's the main guy.
Yeah, the main guy, and he wants to talk about how they're collaborating their world, which is very similar to how we do in the GUI world. So it's kind of but I want to see the differences. I think it'd be interesting. I would prefer, what I'd like to do is do a head-to-head between Josh and Alphinius, but that's just dangerous. I don't think we do that. The stream will go on for 6.5 hours because
right,
between the two of them, they'd never stop talking.
We'll need a case sitting at our feet.
I'm just gonna sit here with popcorn. What are you talking about? I'm just like, all right, cool. I'm just gonna stoke the fire every once in a while. Just be like, so what about this part? It'd be great. I love it. Or they'd work together and it'd be even funnier.
Little sprinkles of gasoline here and there. That's all.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I like that.
All right, we are about to begin. Let's grab favorite beverage.
So you were talking about my crow. Last night during our dungeon stream, I had to walk away from my camera. My wife usually sits by and watches because we do something called Dark Mysteries, and she loves the Dark Mysteries. Like I'll go and I'll start loading up, and then she'll hear me starting to talk, and you see her head pop out of the kitchen or the room, and is it Dark Mysteries? No, not yet, hon. Not yet. Oh, we're still just shooting shit.
That's hilarious. I'll have to jump in.
So she's sitting here, and they're just like, the one guy's just like, I'm just waiting for Chris's crow to move. And so my wife off camera just
That's awesome.
It was great. Yeah, slowly trying to get her to join the Discord. I got it to the point now where she'll talk from there so that they can hear her on the mic.
Right.
Before just.
All right.
Corey said this.
We're gonna hop in 3, 2. And we're live. So welcome back to another Tavern Talks with myself, of course, the grumpy DM, Corey from Chrysalis Endeavors, and our new guest, Chris, who is one of our newest, a guy from our newest sponsor and partner that we're working with, Dungeon Studios. So please introduce yourself, Chris.
Hi, my name's Chris Bazenier, and I'm one of the creative directors for Dungeon Stream Studios. I'm essentially the guy who's writing all the lore and helping get everybody's ideas all put together and connecting all the little dots to make sure the world meshes and is a nice, coherent story.
Awesome. So yeah, Chris is going to probably join us multiple times in the next couple weeks as we dive through the Dungeon Master's Guide, which everybody says that they never read, which I'm going to be honest, there's been moments where I haven't read it myself, especially 5th edition. If you've read 3rd edition, 3.5, and
I've
The rest of
perused the book.
them, you just kind of get more. But thank you for the bits. Um, Dungeon Studios, we are excited to have them on board. So, and there's not just Chris, there's a slew of artists, musicians, storytellers, lore writers, and all sorts of fun things. And we are just excited to have them on board.
Ton of
So,
ammo.
before we do anything, please, Chris, give me your background as a player of D&D.
Well, my journey in the world of Dungeons and Dragons began with a little virus known as COVID-19. Um, so I actually avoided D&D for a very long time in my life. I had a experience with a very strict dungeon master in high school. I I really just wanted to tell jokes, and Buddy wasn't having it. He stormed out of my basement, left me and my buddy sitting there like, I don't know, man. I thought it was funny. So that was just kind of like that was it for me, man. I was done. I was scared right off of it. I went years and years, never going back to it. I did Magic the Gathering. I did lots of other stuff, and then once this pandemic hit us, I'm just left at home like, "Oh, man, what do I do? What can I do that's fun?" So I had a friend who was just always pestering me, Chris, let's play some D&D. Chris, I'll write your character sheet for you. Chris, let's do this. So I broke down, COVID, fine, let's do this. I had so much fun. I even remember my wife walking in one day as my character, Kilgore Scampers the Sodomizer, was doing his stuff. And she's just laughing her ass off, just off to the side. And as soon as I was done, she looked at me, how do I get involved? And I'm like, all right, yeah, we'll do this. So I did that for a little while, just for a couple of months, and it got to be Halloween. And my one friend, our DM, he looked at me and he's just like, Chris, how would you like to do like a little short, something that's very Halloween themed? Halloween being my main bag. I agreed. So we started that little campaign. By the way, the title of said campaign is Dungeons and Dragons versus the Evil Dead. So we started that, and after a couple of sessions of that, it's like, hey, you've been writing a lot of notes. Yeah, yeah. You want to take over? I was like, sure. Why not, man? Go for it. And I've been DMing ever since. I've been on Start Playing Games. I've posted. I had a group that also was able to run through the Evil Dead campaign. I just finished with them last week, actually. So really excited about that. That's basically it, man. That's how I got started.
Awesome. Yeah, it definitely sounds like some of us. I got lucky, like I've said before. I got lucky. Had a great game master um, back when third edition was the newest edition, and I was in high school. Corey, what's your story? I don't think we had a chance to get your
Yeah,
story.
again, yeah, I was in high school, just like you. You know, all of my friends were a lot older than me. Grew up in a military town and went to the local game store, and most of my friends were active duty and doing, that running games at the game store, and we even had a playtest group that would playtest new stuff. Playtested some Steve Jackson games. GURPS Horror was the
Ooh.
was the second edition. GURPS Horror was the first time I got my name in a book, and I was like 17, and I was just so excited, right? And then been game mastering different games and creating games ever since. So yeah, and I would say that even before I learned D&D, when I was like playing with GI Joes and Legos, I'd make stats for them and make actually rule sets and stuff. So yeah, I've been doing this since probably since inception. I don't know.
No, I feel you there. I mean, like I said, I've told people before, is mine wasn't even in D&D at first. I started when I was about 7 or 8 years old on an online it was an online game. It was just a website that you go play these little stupid games, but at the same time, there were these small um, groups you could become or gather with, and then it just became a collaborative story. And then once I found out that there was an actual name for it with Dungeons and Dragons, I was like, oh, I found my home. So Yeah, but what we're going to go over today is what a lot of people, at least I know I have at first at times had troubles with it. I'm sure the rest of you have at least had some sort of difficulty with it. World building at the beginning, not when you've got something, not when you're pulling from modules. We're talking from a blank piece of paper. Where do you start? The big picture information that you need. So I know from the book that it states that you kind of go with what is known. What are the core elements of your world or your narrative? Um, is it going to be a high magic? Is it going to be gritty and barely any magic? And magic is evil. Is it going to be one god, two gods, millions of gods? Is it going to be shifting between planes on a constant basis? Is it a ripple between the different planes? These are all questions that have to be answered when you start building these large pictures. This is, though, I will admit, before we go any farther than this, there are two ways that most people build games, either inward out or outward in. Right now, we are going to talk about an outward in concept. So before anybody starts like stabbing me from the internet, that's the direction we're going with this. So, um, what's your guys' opinion on the outward in concept, and what would you say would be your top things you would have to know in order to start your world building?
So I
Oh,
think you
you go
named
ahead,
some
Gary.
of them, and I'll toss it over to Chris. The things, who are the gods, and what do they have control over, and how active are they, right? Because there can be a lot of gods, that, but they're not really active in the things of the world. Or there could be a lot of gods that are very active, and you get these like messages from them to do certain things, right? And I think you have to know that frame before you can start, telling. Because I think about um, the Vikings TV show. Lots of gods, but they're not really active. You know what I mean? And but they're core to the story of that Vikings TV show. Um, and I think that the other thing you mentioned about magic, where does it sit, right? And everybody has to
Mhm.
know where it is, because you don't want some players thinking it's high magic like Forgotten Realms, and other players thinking it's like Conan, right? Where there's
Mhm.
it's low magic. So yeah, I think that those two big things is one place to start. Chris?
Yeah, yeah, I would have to agree with you. Absolutely. You need to know what makes your world tick. And by knowing who made the world is going to really be a big aid to that. To not have that is it's very difficult. Um, so I myself, I usually like to start off with first of all, what kind of story I want to tell for my players, and then I go out from that and I go, okay, so how does this world come to be? What are the rules of the world? What are the rules of the magic? Because like um, James said, that you could have a world where there is no magic. You can have a world where there's magic, but it's extremely rare, or it's just a part of regular day utility in life.
Yeah, so and you see this in modern cinema a lot. So something gritty that doesn't have a ton of magic. Uh, the ones I'm trying to think of one specifically for that culture, but as you start to get bigger and bigger in the magic aura, you go to stuff like Lord of the Rings, where magic's there and people can use it, but it's not the center point. And then you go to things like, and we're going to go very Miyazaki, like Howl's Moving Castle, where everything has a magical or connection to it somehow, shape, or form. And
Good
knowing where
reference.
you want to, what was that?
Good reference, by the way.
Yeah. So one of the ways, and the other one I could think of that is a little different, I would say it's not magic, but it is. Think of How to Train Your Dragon. It's not magic, not really magic in the world, but you're running around with dragons, the most mythical creature anybody ever talks about. So these core pieces will definitely change the whole epic of the story. Now, the second thing is deity. What is your divine connection? how much do they develop, how much do they influence the world, and how much do they influence the people directly. So as you said, Vikings, they're very important. They're part of their culture. They have a connection, but if they're not just upfront and personal with them, where you go into, and I'm going to take another very huge direction difference, is Disney's Hercules. They're all over the darn place and they interact all the time. So these two things can drastically change how your players will interact in the world and how the world is developed in the first place. Now, one thing I like to do personally, and I'm sure we'll get your guys' opinions on this as well, is starting with that of a very high divine connection at the beginning, because something had to build whatever you have. But then how did they lose it? What happened? What kind of catastrophe or disaster or war or whatever the conflict is has changed now the connection between the world and the divine or the deific, whichever way you want to pronounce it. But what do you guys think? Corey?
That's been the. Oh yeah, Corey, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead.
Okay. That was one of the really big things that we're currently working on right now with the Dungeon Stream Studios is our cosmology and our pantheon and how it works. And we're kind of going with like a trickle down effect where you have your primary gods that created these primordials, and it kind of just trickled down from there until you get their finalized versions, the mortals, the elves, the tieflings. So we have them all matched up. We're even creating a chart. We have one of our writers right now who's currently working on a chart that will actually allocate um, certain like cleric orders or paladin orders that you could take it. And we're making sure too that it's not like we're not railroading people like you have to take this guy. No, because realistically, two different gods from two different areas could say be a part of life.
Mhm.
Um, they are creators, so their connection to life is there. And so that's been a really big thing that we're working on is how we get from this god that creates these other gods that goes and creates life, um, basically through their sibling bickery that this is all born from.
Nice.
So I'm going to jump back to something Chris said earlier about trying to figure out what the story that you want to tell and kind of what are those things that you want to do in your game. Um, and having the magic and the divine and all of those big kind of why pieces, right? Because you have to know why things happen the way they happen. Having all of those why pieces line up so that you can tell the story you want to tell. And the players don't necessarily have to know all of this stuff. They don't have to read, all of this lore. They could be from a small town and they really only know a few of the agricultural gods because that's what's big in their town. But as long as you have, and I don't want to cross over into the second part from the inside out. I'm still sticking with the outside in.
Mhm.
Um, as long as you know all of the framework and where you want them to go and what you want them to learn about, it might even be really enjoyable for them to discover gods in the world that they knew nothing about and discover how other people live and worship and do their tithing or whatever it is. Yeah, I think that would be something. Everybody thinks that to enjoy it, you have to know all the pieces, and I disagree with that. I think you can enjoy a game a lot not knowing all the lore and learning the lore in the game.
Yeah, actually, that is what we're trying to do with our pantheon currently right now. The ancients are unknown gods. Nobody knows about them, and we are hoping that over time, people will find out a little bit about that story. Um, but yeah, no, you definitely you don't want people to be railroad. You want people to have that opening to tell their story, right? Because a lot of it is telling your story of your players, and just trying to make some connections to make the story a little bit more interesting so that they feel like they fit within the world. So taking their story and finding a way to make them a part of this world and give that feeling of connectedness.
So I'm gonna
That's a great. You guys did great on both of those
I'm,
concepts.
I'm gonna throw a
Go
question
for it.
your way, James, based
Sure.
on what Chris just said. How do you kind of partner the big world to the character driven stories, because that's something that, like you said, you read backstories before every session,
Mm-hmm.
right? So what are some of the tricks and tools that you do to allow that player agency, and if they come up with something that doesn't quite fit in the cosmology, doesn't quite fit in all of those pieces, what do you do to try and give that player that present, like we were talking about a couple sessions ago?
So yeah, so that's a great question. And a lot of times, what I'll do is, and it'll be more sporadic than you'd expect, is I'll read through a backstory 3 or 4 times over a month period, right? If I run a weekly game, I'm reading the backstory every week. But if I'm playing in my world or if I'm playing in someone else's world or a module, I'm also getting that update from whatever I'm reading in those stories or what I'm writing in general. My first campaign that I had ever written by myself, full homebrew, no anything, um, started out with just a basic pantheon, and then that was all designed around the dragon. So 2 dragons, Bahamut and Tiamat had a war. The war created the world by just the calamity between the two. And then as Tiamat died, was torn to shreds pretty much, the the chromatic dragons were released because all the heads were each color and they birthed their own form to themselves. And it was known that there were only one dragon of every color in the world. And then as a defense mechanism, Bahamut, not tearing himself, but magically separating himself into the metallic dragons, was able to gain his order and right. What they didn't know, and they didn't find out until halfway through the session, or halfway through the campaign, which was like 50 or 60 episodes, is that these were nothing more than pets to an elder god. And when they found that, I watched their minds just go and explode. It was great. And they found out that dragons weren't anything special, but the fact that they took that time and energy and kept that secret, they made themselves the gods rather than what they were. And it was a lot of fun. So
Sounds
yeah,
a
I
lot of fun.
do. I do a lot of times read through things, and a lot of the stuff I give my players is sprinkled in very quickly, and it's simple stuff. Session I had just last night, there was a group of cultists, and a veteran was there, and one of the players had sprinkled in something stating that the person that wrecked their village wore black armor, and it was easy to just be like, okay, not only there's multiple of these, but it gave that thrill and that drive to kill this enemy to almost the point where they were risking their livelihood and their consciousness of just a reckless rage to go straight at the enemy. No matter if there's 6 or 7 around them, they went after that character because it was in their backstory. And when you see those types of presence, as you said, you see the connection that the players gain. Even if it's small lore or big lore, it's still wrapping them into that episodic world and scenarios that you're giving their players, which is the excitement that we get as game masters, is to watch the players unravel and create and collaborate with us in the world that we've put countless hours sometimes into. So,
I think leaving a lot of openings too when you're trying to create a world for that keeping things vague, so in such a way that the players can really add to your world. Because I find a lot of the times when I do that, I get players that come up and they introduce new ideas in the world. And I'm just like, my mind's blown, and I'm like, that's canon, man. Like, yeah, check mark, you're good. Yep, that's stuff. That's stuff.
Right.
Which is really great. And you were talking about subtleties too. I actually have another campaign with my in real life players. I'm not going to do the acting. Um, that they don't know what's going on in the world yet, and I've been sprinkling it with certain events that are going on. I have one player who's a little wishy-washy on scheduling. I'm sure you guys know what that's like. Um, so one of the main things in this campaign, the name of the campaign is Nexus Tower, is that the worlds, the planets, and all the realms are coming to alignment. So basically, my inspiration from this is while going through the monster manual and looking up the monodromes,
Mm.
and the fact that they have that march every what 285 years.
Hmm.
So I that was what kind of gave me the inspiration to create my world, and the whole purpose of my world was, why do they march every 285 years? So that's what I've been working, and I'm giving them little subtle hints here and there, so the player who can't make it very often, hey, every now and then he plane shifts. Nobody knows why, but he does.
Yeah.
I had another player who joined in, did the same thing. He hasn't been back in months, so his character is still technically in the elemental plane of air, and he's just falling. He's been there for months, but you know, that's it. He's just
That's going to
so I
be an
have these.
interesting concept when he comes back. He's like,
Oh, yes, yes, he a very interesting homebrewed creature. He is a lost soul.
oh, nice.
So he walked in, possessed somebody, gave my other PCs the deed to a port. So I got two PCs who now own Purveyor's Port.
There you go.
Um, and then he just checked out. Um, like uh other things we're doing, like in for the dungeon stream, for instance, we have a monster who's a byproduct of a large event known as the Shattering. And the Shattering is this cataclysm that shook the world to its very core, to the point that it's cracked all the way around, spider webbing out from the center point. This effects caused a eruption of kinetic energy that reverberated throughout all the realms, breaking down the barriers between the realms and the very things that were keeping them static, keeping them where they were. So now the realms are spinning within their cosmology. Every now and then they collide with one of each other, creating nexus points. Another thing that happened from this is we have a special creature that's Eneron online exclusive, is the Mass Troph. So first, to explain a little bit, a troph is it's a Greek word, and it's used to find a organism's means of eating. So this is a mass troph. So there's different versions if you look it up. I can't really name any of them right now, but the
Very
basic
good.
idea is when these realms, so you have all these realms and they're layered, then the shattering happens and they collapse in on each other. So you have person in dimension A in one spot, and then somebody in the parallel world to that, dimension B, in the identical spot, and so on and so forth. So when the shattering happened and these worlds collided in on each other, these poor souls were fused together as a large mass of flesh and bone. It is called the Mastroph. It's actually one of our very first creatures that we created for our world.
Very cool.
My personal brain baby. So the stats for him are absolutely insane. He has certain abilities that are pretty crazy. So he has, I could just bring him up for myself right here so I can see it. So one of the abilities for the Mass Troph is Mass Bond. The Mass Troph chooses a living humanoid with 0 hit points within 20 feet. Extending an appendage, it makes contact and begins to bond with the creature on a molecular level. The creature is restrained and has disadvantage on death saving throws. If the creature dies while restrained this way, Mass Troph regains 25 hit points and can choose to mass fuse. And then to mass fuse, the Mass Troph can choose one feature from a single creature to fuse into its own feature list. You can have up to 3 fused features. If you attempt to fuse with a fourth feature, you must defuse with one of the other three, and the fused features last for 1 week. So the idea of this creature is essentially it is constantly building its mass. It starts off large. Once it reaches huge and unmanageable size, it actually splits off and creates another mass troph. So that was one of the big things we were working on. That's kind of like to show, hey, this is what's going on in the world. This is a byproduct and things that people can come
Interesting.
across.
Very cool.
So
Corey?
something you said real early on, and Chris kind of alluded to it in their world's background. We've talked a little bit about deities. We've talked about magic, but there also needs to be some dust on the world. People have lived here before. This is an old world. Lots of things have happened, and I think that trying to figure out what those things are at at least in a regional level so that your players can come into this world in that first session or even session 0 and learn something about their history and tie some of their stuff, even if it's something as small as your village was raided by bandits 2 weeks ago, right? There's some event that they can tag to, and the more of those kind of historical events and the more uh, effort you put into having a background in your world and in your world building, um, and sharing that with your players so that they can kind of think about, oh yeah, well there was a war. I was just a young boy. My father fought in that war, and before you know it, they've got this whole cool backstory that they can tie to, and then you can read it every week and add things into it. So
No, you're absolutely right. There's a couple other points that I was going to go over after we had gotten through the magic and divine, and those big ones are culture, history, and just land development. So you've got why is this mountain here, or why does this mountain upside down? Rather, you've got questions like these you have to answer, or why does this specific flower only grow in this area? What are these things that you've put into your world that are so fantastic that what is the reasoning that they're there? And why are monsters here? Like, what is the point of this? These types of questions I think have to be answered early on in the game as well, because
I love that
otherwise,
you said
what
that.
would it be that?
I love that you said that too. We actually just had a creative writers meeting today for Dungeon Stream Studios, and that was exactly one of the topics we were talking about. While working on our cosmology, certain events. So we actually have writers that are set exclusively right now. One of them is writing fairy tales, grim style fairy tales, for the world. These things could be real. They may not be real. As well as we have another person that we want who's going to be, because we have such a large event in this world. The Shattering is a huge event. It changes the very face of the planet. That it's going to affect like our dwarfs. Like we're talking about an event that cracked the world practically in half. So we have to figure, what happened to the dwarfs that were underground when the shattering occurred? What
Mm-hmm.
happened to the drow in the Underdark when
Yeah.
this earth just opens up? And that's been a big thing. So we even have one of our writers right now who's been tasked to be like, give us some war heroes, give us some lore that's all byproduct. So uh, Josh, our main guy for Dungeon Studios, he has taken the majority of the base races and have taken the write ups and added how they have been changed from
Mhm.
this event. And I just tasked somebody else today with taking the races that we haven't written up yet and finishing that off as well, so that we have this coherent world that everybody can get the understanding and realize how, when writing the background stories, how they want to fit their characters in. Because we talked about a little bit of having that leeway for players to add their completely new ideas in the world, and that's some players. But other players are like, well, what do you got? What are your gods? Because I like some of our players already. I said, hey, write a background. They're like, cool, got, I got it,
Yeah.
good, done. Other guys are like, who are the gods? Who are the pantheons? Some people really, really want to know this stuff. And I
Mhm.
also think that's why when world building, sometimes you might want to even consider who are your players before you even start your world build. Another thing, like with Tasha's, they added the lineage, and the way that you can kind of change with that, so you can really flip the script on a lot of stuff that were put in there. That's just kind of, yeah, I get it for the time when you guys wrote that, but right now this is a different time and things are much more
Mhm.
inclusive, and we're, you want to get that. So it's like, do you want inherent racism in this world? Like I would ask my players, do you want the world to have these dwarfs that are just, they suck, man. It's just the way they're written. It's just like, that's that people, you want to know what your players want, and you want to know
Yeah.
what your players are comfortable with, and that's going to be a really, really big topic. And I think that's something you got to consider. So um try to find your players first if you can. I mean, for myself, I haven't always been so lucky. Um, I have had to just write a idea and just throw it out there and hope that everybody liked it. But always making sure that even that there's a little leeway for rewriting is also a really good thing as well, especially if you didn't find your players before creating your world. Make sure you have that little leeway so that when you find your players, you make them feel like this is a game that they want to play.
Yeah, and I think that that's a good time to switch right from that outward
That's
in to
right.
the inward out. Because I think you brought up a great point. Like if you have a group of players, now it's one thing to build a world, to do some world building that you want to run with a bunch of different people. Like with your stream, you don't know who's going to come in, right? You're trying to build this big uh, it, group of people to play in the same world. We're trying to develop it. So that's very much the outward coming in. But if you're picking up the DMG for the first time and you've got 5 friends that you want to run the game for, it's a good time to think about that, from start from your players and work out from, like you were saying, about inherent racism or any other type of thing, right? You're sitting there with 5 of your good friends, you're going to run this game. It's a good time to have a conversation about what is the fantasy world that you want to play. What is that fantasy world? Does that fantasy world include a lot of strife? Does it include high magic? Does it include racism? Do you want to challenge that, through what we do, and just have that kind of like session -1, right? Not even a session 0. You're just talking about the type of world that you want to play in, and get your characters' feedback, and then start building it out. Start building out from the characters they create. If somebody wants to be a cleric, okay, well, let's talk about your gods, and does that cleric worship one god, or does that cleric worship like 3 or 4 gods? So, and yeah, so I'll just turn it back over to you, James, about going from the inside out from world building.
Yeah. So
Um,
the oh,
I was just
you want to
going to
go for
say,
something?
I was just going to say the session -1. I noted that. I'm going to use that. Thank you.
So yeah, we're going to create another session. So you've got session 0 where you're helping, but it's interesting, and you bring up some really good points on this. Is that if they're friends or if it's new people that you've never played with, either way, if you're playing as a game master and you want to bring a story that's exciting to your players, find out what's exciting to your players. So that's definitely a huge point that has to be looked at. Uh, One thing with that though is, like you said, let your players give something. If you haven't put, which we all know that it's just not possible to put 100% of a game world together and have it actually work properly. We have players who do things that will never work, but that's the fun of it. That's the fun. It's the chaos behind the storytelling. It is, but if what you can do is you can give yourself a small guidelines, a an outline that gives the big picture. You don't have to fill anything in the big picture yet. You can just go big picture and then go right there. This is where we're starting. Let your players do everything else. Give them the opportunity to, what's your class? What's your race? What's your background? Okay, why? We have, I know Corey's got a mentor, and it's the same mentor that I have, which is Alphinius Goo from Gooey Cube. And the main thing he looks at everybody when he asks anything is why. If you can answer the why, then the whole story starts to grow faster. Why are there elves? Why are there dwarves? Why do they hate each other every time? Like, why is it that we always take the Lord of the Rings trope where elves and dwarves hate each other, even though we don't make the sense of it and say, "Oh, they were in a war a long, long time ago." No, it's just they hate each other. Nothing about it. There's no logic behind it. They hate each other. No,
Yeah, there's no context.
con- if elves and dwarves are gonna hate each other, why? If you can't answer that question, they don't hate each other. It makes no sense.
Right.
Um, you can tell me this is where I get excited because this is the stuff that I have to deal with all the time. But these things can go all the way down to, why is there a god of death? Why is there a god of light? Why do we have a god of metal? Like, what is the point of these things? If you don't have that understanding and your players don't have that understanding, sometimes it's very difficult to bring a player to something that they can't see, taste, or feel in themselves.
And I think for
So,
role playing, that's
yeah,
extremely important. Because if you can add as much sensory effect to it, that's important. It's an immersive game. It's role play, right?
yeah. No, I agree. And that's a big thing that we have to ask these questions is like, okay, so if we started a character right now and I wanted to play an elven ranger, let's say Gloomstalker. So we're going super dark. He likes to kill the undead and the lost, pretty much the ones that have gotten away from normality. He's going after monstrosities, aberrations, those types of things. Thank you very much, um, for the Shamrock. The Now you have to go back and you have to say, okay, so as a game master, you're asking all these why questions now. Okay, why is an elf? You don't really have to know that. He's an elf because he was born an elf. That makes sense. But why did you pick? Why did you pick ranger? What in your history, or what did you read? What did you grow up doing? What is this that brought you to being a ranger? And then more so, why the heck are you going after the disgusting things in the bottom of the well that nobody else is going to go after? What's the point of it? These questions, when asked, and you start watching people write these down or start to create them in their minds, the story is built for you as a game master. If you just let them tell it, there's a lot of times in both my, because I do paid gaming for teams. I also run the stream on Sundays. There's a lot of times this is exactly what I do. I just
Let them
sit
do it.
and listen, and you'd be shocked when they finally realize that all you've done for the last 20 minutes is sit there. And they're like, "What happened?" I was like, "You guys were role playing. You guys were talking to each other. You guys were telling your backstories. You guys were filling yourselves in. I didn't
Yeah,
have to
you
do
didn't have to
anything.
do anything. Yeah,
I set you in motion, and you took off." And I think those, as a game master, at least for me personally, those are the moments that I get excited about because I'm like, "Oh, I don't have to tell the story. You're telling my story as well as your own." And that's where the collaborative storytelling, I believe, is really the best part of tabletop roleplay.
absolutely. I was fortunate enough, actually, my last session with my real life players, I had my first session that was 100% role play. Not a single die was rolled for combat, maybe some perception checks, persuasion, deception. whatever. But other than that, and I loved it. It
Yeah.
was my favorite session that I've ever had. Yeah, no, I agree absolutely.
What about you, Corey?
Yeah, I think if you can get a whole session that's nothing but role play, and it's nothing, and you're not running 15 NPCs to keep the role play going, right? You have like two or three that kind of pitch in here and there to guide the story a little bit. I mean, that's awesome. And I mean, D&D itself isn't really made for that. I mean, that's we have to, as a game master, allow for it. Whereas some other games are sort of made for the role play and the collaborative storytelling. And some people call those like rules light games.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I see it as no, the rules are just to facilitate role play. They're not. It's
Right.
not about. It's not all about combat and character progression and all of those things. Blades in the Dark, for example, is a good like people call it a role or a rules light, but I
Mm.
look at it
I think
as
burning wheel is another one that's really
yeah.
good for that as well. One
Actually,
of our friends, Alex, is a big fan of that
But
I actually had one of my other players send me. I don't know if you guys ever heard of Tenra.
mm-mm.
one. Mm-mm.
That's one from. It's a Japanese tabletop game.
Okay.
Send me your guys' email later. I'll send you a PDF. It
Yeah.
is heavy, heavy on the role play aspect,
Yeah.
big time.
So back to the world building from the character perspective, and
Mm-hmm.
tossing it back to that, the why. And in that session zero, when everybody's making their characters, and you're asking, okay, why a ranger, and somebody else
Mm-hmm.
is making a sorcerer. Okay, well, why are you a sorcerer? What in your background? And you start to see those blend together, and the parties start to kind of build on each other's background. And sometimes you'll have to ask, why are you guys together? What brought you together? If you don't kind of mandate why they're together, sometimes it's best if you just say
Yeah. Yeah.
you're all part of this thing, and that's why you're together. But having it come together on its own is great, especially if you're
Yeah.
kind of pushing that why and allowing them to world build with you as they create their own characters. Because you may not have had that piece of history that the two kingdoms were at war when they were young, right? That came from a character saying, "Oh,
Mm-hmm.
well, the reason I became a fighter is because I lost my dad in this war with a neighboring kingdom, and I've always
Right.
looked up to this person that I never knew, right?" And that becomes canon, like Chris was
Yeah, and
saying earlier.
then you got a cleric on the other end who's like, I was in a war at a different, but he doesn't give enough information, so you can put those with the combating teams and stuff like that. Yeah, it's definitely fun to watch characters either knowingly or unknowingly blending their characters together. It's
Um,
super fun to watch that.
yeah, absolutely, Corey. As you were talking about the, because you said sometimes it happens where you feel it's just going to be easier. You guys are a part of a guild or whatever, and that's where you can still do a lot of building off of what the other players do with a session zero. One thing I've done before for my D&D versus the Evil Dead campaign, the campaign starts with them getting a letter from an old friend that they adventured with that invites them to Morristown, where the adventure will take place. So in my session zero for those players, I went, okay, so you guys were adventurers with Kilgore. Here is who Kilgore is. This is how he is. This is how he behaves. These are his characteristics. Okay, go. How did you guys meet him? How was your interactions with him? What is so I made sure that I gave that NPC certain little quirks. Always, rejected by his tribe, always trying to go out and create his own new diverse tribe, right? So I tell them, this guy's going to treat you guys all like kinsmen, but he's going to be acting like he's the chief. So little things like that, and then all the players just started going, "Oh, my guy would have done this with Kilgore, and my guy would be like this with Kilgore." So we did that in our session zero, and then it was amazing when we got to session one, seeing them all like right off the bat, they're like, "Oh, Kilgore, you old salty dog. Hey, oh, you remember back in whenever when we got that lynch? Yeah, buddy." It was great. It really helped, and it just added so much more depth to the story.
So I have a question
That's
about Kilgore. Did
interesting for
Kilgore
sure.
survive a couple of sessions at least, or did you eliminate Kilgore early in the campaign?
He survives to the end, but not before getting possessed by a Kandarian spirit.
He was like, "No, I love this character, but I'm going to make this character be killed by you."
Yeah, well, I wanted to make sure that these players had a really good reason. So basically, what happens in this story is there's a carnival. Somebody has a version of the Necronomicon in which that they summon the forest from the movies into the world of D&D, and this forest is growing and spreading.
Mm,
Um, I actually used the Tesseract dungeon design for that dungeon. So the idea of the dungeon is if you were to take the paper and if you were to fold it up and
hmm.
make a box with it, all those paths line up,
Yeah.
right? Um, so I wanted to make sure, like, they're gonna want to go into this forest. Why? Because something came out of the forest, bit your buddy, and now your buddy's possessed, and you've got this cleric that was just so happened to be in the tavern, keeping him sedated.
Very cool. All right. Well, we've went over big world going inward. We've went over inward going out. So any with all of our, I know Chrysalis Endeavors is currently running stream. We're running stream over here in Tabletop Misfits. When this goes to video on demand on YouTube, please, if you have questions like these or these are questions you're having problems answering, place them in the chat rooms for us so that we can come back and answer these for you because this is what we built this entire stream for. It is to make your lives as both game masters and players a little easier. Um,
And if you guys want to ask me any questions, you can hit me up on the Dungeon Stream Discord.
correct. So, um, you guys have anything else you guys want to discuss about the prime requirements of starting to world build?
I just want to leave it with one final kind of wrap it all together is make sure your players know those common things, you know, before we start playing. Make sure they have those a common understanding of the world. Yes, discovering some unknown things is good, but having a common understanding of the world before you start playing, so that they don't get upset when they try to do something that's way outside of the scope of the world. Like three of the players think this is a low magic world, and then one of your players is their only goal is to be this super powerful, magical being, right? And you're like, okay, well that's going to be hard to fit in here. So I think just to wrap it all up, make sure that your group of players has that core common understanding of what the world is.
Agree, man. 100%. Communication is key, especially when dealing with D&D. Talk to your players, see what they want, and try to accommodate that. I say yes and right. That's a big tool. Another thing I always say is I tell my players is like this isn't really my world. This is your world. I'm the vehicle for the story that you guys are going to drive.
No, both of these are great points, and I'm not going to say much else other than D&D is built around collaborative storytelling and a mutual respect for both game master and player. So if you are a game master, please don't hold the reins too tightly. If you are a player, please help your game master. Don't fight him. And I swear you all will have a much better experience, have more fun at the table, and as I've said in multiple streams before this, you will talk about these stories as if they were real for years and years. And I think this is a wonderful place for us to take a sip,
I got coffee.
and come back so we can talk more about our next adventure on Tavern Talks next week. Have a wonderful night.
Take care, everybody. Bye.